Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. The lighthouse keepers logged the sea was angry the night I arrived at Craven Point Lighthouse. Waves crashed against the rocky shore, sending spray high enough to splatter the lantern room windows, 140 feet above the waterline. The keeper I was replacing, a weathered man named Harlan with eyes that never quite met mine, merely grunted when I commented on the ferocity of the storm. "You'll see worse," he said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Much worse. I'd taken the position out of desperation more than desire. After my wife Sarah's death 6 months prior, I couldn't bear to remain in our empty apartment in Portland, surrounded by memories and her lingering scent on pillowcases I couldn't bring myself to wash. The lighthouse keeper job was remote, isolated, and perfect for a man who wanted nothing more than to disappear from the world. Craven Point Lighthouse stands on a small, rocky island 3 miles off the Maine coast. The nearest town, Blackfish Harbor, is little more than a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the constant assault of Atlantic winds. The lighthouse itself is a classic stone tower, built in 1887, with a keeper's cottage nestled at its base. The Coast Guard had automated most lighthouses decades ago, but Craven Point remained one of the few that still required a human operator due to its unique challenges, as the job listing had cryptically stated. I would soon discover what those challenges entailed. Harlan spent exactly 1 day showing me the operations, how to maintain the Fresnel lens, operate the foghorn, keep the logs, and perform the endless maintenance tasks required to keep the lighthouse functioning. He seemed eager to leave, his hands constantly trembling as he packed his meager belongings. "One thing," he said as he stood at the door, sea bag slung over his shoulder. "Don't log the phantom ships. The what? You'll know them when you see them." His eyes darted toward the sea, then back to me. "The Coast Guard will think you're mad if you report them. Best to pretend you don't see them at all." Before I could ask for clarification, he was gone, hurrying down the stone path to where the supply boat waited to take him to the mainland. I watched from the lantern room as the boat disappeared into the mist, feeling the first tendrils of unease creep up my spine. That night, I made my first entry in the keeper's log. October 15, 2022, first night at Craven Point. Weather stormy, visibility poor, all systems functioning normally. No vessels sighted. I slept poorly, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old structure keeping me awake. The wind seemed to whisper words just beyond my comprehension, and several times I jolted upright, certain I'd heard someone calling my name. The next morning dawned clear and calm, as if the previous night's storm had been nothing but a dream. I spent the day familiarizing myself with the lighthouse and its surroundings. The island was small, perhaps 5 acres in total, mostly bare rock with patches of stubborn grass and a few wind-twisted pines. A small dock on the leeward side provided access for the supply boat that would come once a month. Inside the keeper's cottage, I found the accommodations sparse but comfortable. A small kitchen and living area occupied the ground floor, with a bedroom and bathroom above. The furniture was old but sturdy, and the kitchen was well stocked with non-perishables. A diesel generator provided electricity, and a satellite phone offered my only connection to the mainland. There was no internet, no television, just a small radio that picked up a few mainland stations when the weather was clear. The lighthouse tower connected to the cottage through a short, enclosed walkway. The tower itself contained a spiral staircase that led up to the watch room, and above that, the lantern room with its massive Fresnel lens. The lens was a marvel of 19th century engineering, a beehive of prisms that magnified the light from a single bulb into a beam visible for 20 miles. As I climbed the stairs that second evening to light the lamp, I felt a strange sense of peace. This isolated existence suited me. Here I could grieve for Sarah without well-meaning friends trying to help me move on. Here I could be alone with my memories and my guilt, if only that peace had lasted. It was on my 4th night that I saw the first phantom ship. The weather had turned again, a thick fog rolling in from the east, enveloping the lighthouse in a damp, gray shroud. I'd activated the foghorn, a mournful sound that echoed across the water every 30 seconds, and was making my hourly check of the lantern room when I saw it. A ship, moving silently through the fog about half a mile offshore. At first I thought nothing of it. Vessels passed by the lighthouse regularly, though most stayed in the shipping lanes further out. But as I watched, I realized something was wrong. The ship was old, not just an older model, but genuinely antique. It appeared to be a 3-masted schooner, the kind that hadn't been common in these waters for a century or more. I grabbed the binoculars kept in the watch room and trained them on the vessel. What I saw made my blood run cold. The ship was in terrible condition, its sails in tatters, its hull scarred and broken. And on its deck, figures moved about, figures that seemed too thin, too angular to be human. I watched, transfixed, as the ship glided silently through the fog, heading straight for the treacherous rocks that surrounded the eastern side of the island. I should have radioed a warning, it was my duty as keeper, but something stopped me. Harlan's words echoed in my mind, "Don't log the phantom ships." The schooner continued its course, and I braced myself for the inevitable crash. But it never came. Instead, the vessel passed through the rocks as if they weren't there, continuing on its ghostly journey until it disappeared back into the fog. My hands shook as I returned to the keeper's cottage. I poured myself a generous measure of whiskey from the bottle I'd brought with me and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. A trick of the light, perhaps, an hallucination brought on by isolation and grief, but I knew better. What I'd seen was real, or at least real in some sense of the word. That night I wrote in the log, October 19, 2022, weather, foggy, visibility poor, all systems functioning normally, no vessels sighted. It was the first lie in what would become a ledger of falsehoods. Over the next few weeks I saw more phantom ships. They always appeared in poor weather, fog, rain, or snow, and always followed impossible courses that should have dashed them against the rocks. Some were ancient vessels like the schooner, while others were more modern, fishing trawlers with rusted hulls, pleasure craft with shattered windows, even a small Coast Guard cutter with a gaping hole in its side. And always there were figures on board, never clear enough to make out details, but always moving in ways that seemed just wrong enough to send shivers down my spine. I told myself there must be a rational explanation. Perhaps Craven Point was situated in some kind of atmospheric anomaly that created mirages. Maybe the isolation was affecting my mind more than I realized. Or perhaps, and this thought came to me in the darkest hours of the night, perhaps Sarah was trying to communicate with me from beyond. Sarah had loved the sea. We'd met on a whale-watching tour off the coast of Oregon, both of us there alone, both of us captivated more by the vastness of the ocean than the occasional spout of a distant whale. We'd married on a beach, barefoot in the sand, with only the waves as witnesses. And she had died in the water, a kayaking accident while I watched helplessly from shore, too far away to reach her in time. The thought that she might be reaching out to me through these phantom ships was both comforting and terrifying. I began spending more time in the lantern room, watching for the ghostly vessels, hoping for some sign, some message meant specifically for me. My log entries remained falsified. November 5, 2022, weather, rain, moderate visibility, all systems functioning normally. Cargo vessel passed 5 miles offshore, heading south. November 12, 2022, weather. Clear, good visibility, all systems functioning normally, no vessels sighted. November 18, 2022, weather, snow, poor visibility, all systems functioning normally, no vessels sighted. The supply boat came on November 20th, bringing food, fuel, and mail. The man who piloted it, a taciturn local named Jenkins, barely spoke as he helped me unload the supplies, but as he was preparing to leave, he paused. "How you holding up out here?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Fine," I replied. "It's quiet, but that's what I wanted." He nodded, then said, "You seeing things yet?" My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Harlan used to talk, when he'd had a few, said he saw things out here that couldn't be real. Jenkins shrugged, figured it was just the isolation getting to him. "Happens to some keepers. I haven't seen anything unusual," I lied. Jenkins studied me for a moment, then nodded again. "Good, keep it that way. Some say this place has a way of getting into your head if you let it." After he left, I found myself more unsettled than before. So Harlan had seen the phantom ships too. It wasn't just me. But what were they, and why did they appear at Craven Point? I began researching the lighthouse's history, poring over the old logbooks that were stored in a cedar chest in the living room. Most contained mundane entries about weather conditions and passing ships, but occasionally I found cryptic notations. March 3, 1923, SS Meridian sighted again tonight. Impossible, as she went down with all hands in 18. December 12, 1945, the Fletcher appeared in the storm, third time this year. God help those poor souls. February 28, 1967, another ghost ship. Won't record the name, they seem to come more frequently when acknowledged. The last entry chilled me. Was I making things worse by watching for them, by thinking about them? But I couldn't stop now. I needed to understand what was happening. I expanded my research, using the shortwave radio to contact a librarian in Blackfish Harbor who agreed to look up information about shipwrecks in the area. She was able to confirm that many vessels had indeed met their end on the treacherous rocks around Craven Point, both before and after the lighthouse was built. The locals call it the Graveyard Point, she told me over the crackling radio connection. There's an old saying that for every soul lost in those waters, the sea grants one phantom crossing. Do you believe that? I asked. There was a long pause before she answered. I believe the sea keeps its own counsel and its memory is long. Be careful out there, keeper. The phantom sightings continued, becoming more frequent as winter deepened. Sometimes I would see 3 or 4 ghostly vessels in a single night, all following courses that would have destroyed any physical ship. I began to notice patterns. The same ships would return, always on the same course, always with the same damage. It was as if they were caught in a loop, doomed to replay their final journey for eternity. And then on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, everything changed. The day had been unusually calm, the sea flat and gray beneath an overcast sky. As darkness fell, a light snow began to drift down, coating the island in a thin white blanket. I lit the lamp and settled in for my watch, expecting another night of phantom sightings. At first, all was quiet. The snow continued to fall, and the beam from the lighthouse cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty sea. But around midnight, I noticed something strange. The snow was falling upward from the sea toward the sky. I blinked, certain I was seeing things, but the phenomenon continued. Snowflakes rose from the water's surface, swirling upward into the night, and in their midst, a ship began to take form. Unlike the other phantom vessels, this one seemed to be materializing rather than sailing into view. It coalesced from the ascending snow, becoming more solid with each passing moment. A sleek yacht, modern and expensive, its white hull gleaming despite the darkness. I recognized it immediately. It was the Artemis, a charter vessel from Newport, and I recognized it because I had been aboard it 6 months ago, on the day Sarah died. We had been celebrating our anniversary with a weekend on the Oregon coast. The kayaking trip was supposed to be a surprise. I had arranged it weeks in advance, knowing how much Sarah loved being on the water. The Artemis had taken us out to a secluded cove, where we launched our kayaks into what seemed like calm water. But the sea is never truly calm, and the weather had turned quickly. A sudden squall blew in from the west, churning the water into whitecaps. I had made it back to the yacht, but Sarah had capsized, and by the time the crew could reach her. I gripped the railing of the watchroom, my knuckles white, as the Artemis fully materialized before me. This was impossible. The yacht was in Oregon, thousands of miles away. It couldn't be here off the coast of Maine, appearing like the other phantom ships, unless it too had been lost at sea. With trembling hands, I reached for the binoculars and focused on the vessel. The deck was empty save for a single figure standing at the bow. A woman, her back to me, her dark hair whipping in a wind I couldn't feel. "Sarah," I whispered, the name catching in my throat. As if she heard me, the figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of her face, Sarah's face, pale and beautiful and terrible. Her eyes met mine across the impossible distance, and her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I dropped the binoculars and raced down the spiral staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to reach her, had to speak to her, had to understand what she was trying to tell me. I burst out of the lighthouse into the swirling snow, running toward the rocky shore that faced the phantom yacht. "Sarah," I screamed into the night. "Sarah, I'm here." The Artemis hung impossibly in the air just offshore, snow still swirling upward around it. On its bow, the figure Sarah, it had to be Sarah, raised her arm and pointed directly at me. And then she spoke, her voice somehow carrying clearly over the water. "You let me die." The words struck me like physical blows. "No," I gasped, "it was an accident. The storm. You knew the weather was turning." Sarah's voice continued, flat and accusing. "You saw the clouds building, but you wanted to surprise me. You ignored the warnings." She was right. The charter captain had mentioned the possibility of a squall, but I had insisted we continue with the trip. I had wanted everything to be perfect, had refused to let a little weather ruin my carefully planned surprise. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, falling to my knees on the rocky shore. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," her voice replied, colder now. "You sent me to my death. And now I've come for you." The Artemis began to move, not sailing but floating toward the island, toward me. As it approached, I could see that it wasn't just Sarah aboard. There were others now, shadowy figures lining the rails, all watching me with empty eyes. I scrambled to my feet and ran back toward the lighthouse, terror giving me speed. Behind me, I heard a terrible grinding sound as the phantom yacht reached the shore, not crashing against it, but passing through the solid rock as if it were mist. I reached the lighthouse door and slammed it shut behind me, throwing the heavy iron bolt into place. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, listening for sounds of pursuit. For a long moment, all was silent. Then came a soft tap 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 against the door. "Michael," Sarah's voice called, so close she could have been standing right beside me. "Let me in, Michael, we need to talk." "You're not real," I said, my voice breaking. "You're just in my head, am I?" The door handle turned, though the bolt was still in place. "Are you sure about that? Go away," I shouted, pushing away from the door and backing toward the spiral staircase. "Leave me alone." Sarah's laugh drifted through the solid wood, a sound I had once loved but now filled me with dread. "I can't do that, Michael. We're bound together, you and I, by guilt, by love." By the sea, I turned and fled up the stairs, taking them two at a time, not stopping until I reached the lantern room. The great lens continued its steady rotation, sending its beam out across the water, oblivious to my terror. From this height I could see the Artemis, now fully beached on the island, its hull passing impossibly through solid rock, and streaming from its deck a procession of figures, some in modern clothes, others in garb from centuries past, all moving toward the lighthouse. The dead of the sea coming for me, I snatched up the shortwave radio, frantically turning the dial to the emergency frequency. "Mayday, mayday," I gasped into the microphone. "This is Craven Point Lighthouse. I need immediate evacuation. They're coming, the ships, the dead, they're here on the island." Only static answered me. I tried the satellite phone next, punching in the Coast Guard emergency number with shaking fingers. The call connected, but all I could hear was the sound of waves and faintly, what might have been voices underwater. Below me, the lighthouse door crashed open. Footsteps sounded on the spiral staircase, dozens of them, slow and inexorable, climbing toward me. I was trapped. In desperation, I turned to the keeper's log, still open on the small desk. I grabbed a pen and began to write frantically. December 21, 2022, they're real. All the phantom ships are real. They carry the dead, those lost at sea, and now they've come ashore. God help me, Sarah is leading them. My Sarah, who I lost, who I killed through my carelessness. If anyone finds this, know that Craven Point is not just a lighthouse. It's a beacon for the dead, a crossing point between their world and ours. Harlan knew, all the keepers knew. That's the real job here, not to guide ships to safety, but to witness the passage of those already lost. I don't know what will happen to me, but I deserve whatever comes. Sarah is right, I let her die. And now, the pen slipped from my fingers as the first of the phantom figures reached the lantern room. Sarah stood in the doorway, her skin pale and waterlogged, her eyes as dark and fathomless as the deep ocean. Behind her crowded the others, sailors with seaweed tangled in their beards, women in sodden Victorian dresses, children with starfish clinging to their shoulders. "It's time, Michael," Sarah said, extending a dripping hand toward me. "Time to join us. What do you want from me?" I whispered. The same thing all of us wanted, someone to witness our passing, someone to remember us, someone to join us. She smiled, her teeth gleaming like pearls in the rotating light. "The sea is lonely, Michael, but we don't have to be." I looked past her, through the glass walls of the lantern room, at the dark water surrounding the island. How many souls had been lost out there? How many had the keepers of Craven Point watched pass by in their phantom ships, never acknowledging, never recording, never understanding? "If I come with you," I said slowly, "what happens to the lighthouse?" "Someone new will come," Sarah replied. "Someone else who needs to disappear, who needs to face their guilt. The lighthouse always finds the right keeper." I thought of Harlan, of his trembling hands and averted eyes. How long had he witnessed the phantom ships before he couldn't bear it anymore? How many keepers before him had faced the same choice I now faced? I took a step toward Sarah, then another. Her hand remained outstretched, water dripping from her fingertips to pool on the floor. "Will it hurt?" I asked. "Only for a moment," she promised, like falling asleep in deep water. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold and wet but solid, as real as anything I'd ever touched. Behind her, the crowd of drowned souls parted, creating a path back down the spiral staircase. "Where are we going?" I asked as she led me toward the stairs. "Home," Sarah replied, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Back to the sea." We descended the lighthouse, the procession of the dead flowing around us like water. Outside, the snow had stopped its unnatural ascent, and the night was clear and cold. The Artemis waited on the shore, glowing with an inner light that cast no shadows. As we approached the vessel, I looked back at the lighthouse one last time. Its beams swept over us, through us, continuing its endless rotation. In a few days, or perhaps weeks, someone would come to check on me. They would find the lighthouse empty, the log with its final, frantic entry, and they would know. Another keeper lost to Craven Point. And eventually someone new would come, someone running from their past, someone seeking isolation, someone carrying the weight of guilt, and the cycle would begin again. Sarah's hand tightened around mine as we stepped aboard the Artemis. The phantom crew moved silently around us, preparing to depart. I felt no fear now, only a strange sense of acceptance. This was always where I was heading, from the moment Sarah died, from the moment I let her die. As the yacht began to move, pulling away from the island, I watched Craven Point Lighthouse grow smaller in the distance, its beam still faithfully sweeping the water. A warning and a beacon and a bridge between worlds. The last thing I wrote in the keeper's log was true. Craven Point was not just a lighthouse, it was a crossing point for the dead. And now it would guide me home, into the waiting arms of the sea and whatever lay beyond.